Good evening, everyone. Jai Bhim to all. I welcome you all for the another session of Annihilation of Caste. So, Sushant sir, over to you.
Maitripurna Jai Bhim to all. Welcome to the Annihilation of Caste Part 5, Section 17. Assuming that Chaturvarnya is practicable, I contend that it is the most vicious system, that the Brahmin should cultivate knowledge, that the Kshatriya should bear arms, that the Vaishya should trade, and that the Shudra should serve sound, as though it was a system of division of labor. Whether the theory was intended to state that the Shudra need not, or that whether it was intended to lay down that he must not, is an interesting question. The defenders of Chaturvarnya give it the first meaning. They say, why should the Shudra need trouble to acquire wealth when the three Varnas are there to support him? Why need the Shudra bother to take to education when there is a Brahmin to whom he can go when the occasion for reading or writing arises? Why need the Shudra worry to arm himself because there is a Kshatriya to protect him? The theory of Chaturvarnya, understood in this sense, may be said to look upon the Shudra as the ward and the three Varnas as his guardian. Thus interpreted, it is a simple, elevating and alluring theory. Assuming this to be the correct view of the underlying conception of Chaturvarnya, it seems to me that the system is neither foolproof nor knave-proof. What is to happen if the Brahmins, Vaishya and Kshatriya fail to pursue knowledge, to engage in economic enterprise, and to be efficient soldiers, which are their respective functions? Contrariwise supports that they discharge their functions, but flout their duty to the Shudra or to one another. What is to happen to the Shudra if the three classes refuse to support him on fair terms or combine to keep him down? Who is to safeguard the interests of the Shudra, or for the matter, that of the Vaishya and Kshatriya, when the person who is trying to take advantage of his ignorance is the Brahmin? Who is to defend the liberty of the Shudra, and for the matter of that, of the Brahmin and the Vaishya, when the person who is robbing him of it is a Kshatriya? Interdependence of one class on another class is inevitable. Even dependence of one class upon another may sometimes become allowable. But why make one person depend upon another in the matter of his vital needs? Education, everyone must have. Means of defense, everyone must have. These are the paramount requirements of every man for his self-preservation. How can the fact that his neighbor is educated and armed help a man who is uneducated and disarmed? The whole theory is absurd. These are the questions which the defenders of Chaturvarnya do not seem to be troubled about. But they are very pertinent questions. Assuming their conception of Chaturvarnya that the relationship between the different classes is that of ward and the guardian is the real conception underlying Chaturvarnya, it must be admitted that it makes no provision to safeguard the interests of the ward from the misdeeds of the guardian. Whether the relationship of guardian and the ward was a real underlying conception on which the Chaturvarnya was based, there is no doubt that in practice the relation was that of a master and servants. The three classes, Brahmins, Kshatriya and Vaishya, although not very happy in their mutual relationship, managed to work by compromise. The Brahmin flattered the Kshatriya, and both let the Vaishya live in order to be able to live upon him. But the three agreed to beat down the Shudra. He was not allowed to acquire wealth, lest he should be independent of the three Varnas. He was prohibited from acquiring knowledge, lest he should keep a steady vigil regarding his interest. He was prohibited from bearing arms, lest he should have the means to rebel against their authority. That this is how the Shudra were treated by the Traivarnikas is evidenced by the laws of Manu. There is no code of laws more infamous regarding social rights than the laws of Manu. Any instance from anywhere of social injustice must pale before it. Why have the mass of people tolerated the social evils to which they have been subjected? There have been social revolutions in other countries of the world. Why have there not been social revolutions in India is a question which has incessantly troubled me. There is only one answer. which I can give, and it is that the lower classes of Hindus have been completely disabled for direct action on account of its ritual system of Chaturvarnya. They could not bear arms, and without arms, they could not rebel. They were all ploughman, or rather condemned to be ploughman, and they never were allowed to convert their plowshare into swords. They had no bayonets. Therefore, everyone who chose could and did sit upon them. On account of the Chaturvarnya, they could receive no education. They could not think out or know the way to their salvation. They were condemned to be lowly, and not knowing the way of escape and not having the means of escape, they become reconciled to eternal servitude, which they accepted as their inescapable fate. It is true that even in Europe, the strong has not shrunk from the exploitation, nay, the spoliation of the weak. But in Europe, the strong have never contrived to make the weak helpless against exploitation so shamelessly as was the case in India among the Hindus. Social war has been raging between the strong and the weak, far more violently in Europe than it has ever been in India. Yet, the weak in Europe has had in his freedom of military service his physical weapon in suffering, his political weapon, and in education, his moral weapon. These three weapons for emancipation were never withheld by the strong from the weak in Europe. All these weapons were, however, denied to the masses in India by Chaturvarnya. There cannot be a more degrading system of social organization than the Chaturvarnya. It is a system which deadens, paralyzes, and cripples the people from helpful activity. This is no exaggeration. History bears ample evidence. There is only one period in Indian history which is a period of freedom, greatness, and glory. That is the period of Maurya Empire. At all other times, the country suffered from defeat and darkness. But the Maurya period was a period when Chaturvarnya was completely annihilated. When the Shudras, who constituted the mass of the people, came into their own and became the rulers of the country. The period of defeat and darkness is the period when Chaturvarnya flourished to the damnation of the greater part of the people of the country.
We hold here. We pause here to discuss because I think this paragraph needs a lot of discussion, because I think applied to the current situation of a country, this paragraph suits the complete description of what is happening in our country even today. And I think, here Baba Ambedkar has spoken about the upper caste the Trivarnikas have been arguing that they are like the guardians of the Shudras. But if we see in reality, they are not the guardians. They are the masters who are the slavers of the masses. And I think, there has been a wonderful study which shows, if you know about social capital is a trust between the people. And I think it's a World Bank study which found out that in the social pyramid, as you go up, the social capital increases, and as you go down, the social capital decreases. So, for example, it's very easy for the Brahmins, Baniyas, and the Kshatriyas to come together and work with each other, even when there is a difference between them. But it is very difficult for the people at the bottom of this caste hierarchical pyramid to trust each other and to come together and work for their common interests. So what Baba Ambedkar has been saying in this paragraph is so important even today, that this the kind of weaknesses which have been rendered to the Shudras and Ati Shudras in terms of because they do not have the freedom to join the military service. Now, when we look at the military service, it is totally dominated by the few castes. Okay, military service in India is only a handful of families, so to say. If we look at the political, even if our masses are suffering, they do not have the political weapons, because the political parties, you take any party except a few parties, are dominated by the dominant castes. And also, if we look at the education as a moral weapon, we see that majority of our people are still denied the education, and by that, what we can say, the moral weapon. So I think this description of three weapons which are completely denied to the Shudras and Ati Shudras, and the way this social pyramid create a kind of a social capital for the three varnas, the Brahmin, Kshatriya, and the Vaishyas. It's very evident. You can see even today that this kind of a nexus between the three varnas exist, and we can still, we can see today, in the military services, in education, in politics, how the people have been denied the very strength which they can acquire by the virtue of their numbers. And it's very important. At the end of this passage, Baba Ambedkar says that Indian subcontinent only saw a golden period at the time of the Maurya Empire, and that's true. Whatever development that we saw in our country in terms of when India was glorious, when the Chinese respected India, when the Europe respected India, that was a time when the Maurya Empire was on the ascent, and that was the period when, I think it's period of about 140 or 150 years. I don't know exactly how many years, but that was a period where the annihilation of caste, the Varna system was completely abolished, and the Shudras became the rulers of the country. And that was the golden period. So that's a hint today that so long as the power lies in the hands of a couple of people, couple of castes, and majority of the caste are denied this kind of the weapons, this country cannot have a golden period. So I think, this paragraph is so important to understand. And there is one very important question. Even despite of so many hardship in our country, in our country today, why there is no social revolution? This is a very important question that we should ask again and again, again and again, again and again. There was a social revolution in Europe. In Britain, there was a social revolution when the industrial revolution took place, and there were laborers. They were toiling hard. The children were exploited. The women were exploited. There was a revolution a social revolution in Britain. There was a social revolution in France. There was a social revolution everywhere. But what is it? In China, there was a social revolution. What happened to this country? Why India never saw a social revolution? And I think that's a very important question that we need to ask. Because without social revolution, you cannot break this very ironclad structure of the caste system, because it's like a deep structure which is inbuilt in our country. So I think these are very important questions that Baba Ambedkar has raised in this particular section, and I think we should throw some light on this, all of us.
I think
Yeah.
in this paragraph, which has started by the very well described way of justifying the Chaturvarna from, you can say, the upper so-called rest of the three Chaturvarnas, how to justify it. It has been a honey swabbed and trapped justification. They have justified it in such a way that it's a division of labor. But actually it was not division of labor, it was the exploitation of the labor. It started like this. And after that, what Baba Sahib was trying to convey is that what all was taken away from us to remain us in that position which they wanted us to be. Yes, rest opinion?
Yes, good.
They were deprived of education, and they could not bear arms, and without arms they could not rebel.
We can move further.
Sir,
Pankaj?
yeah, sir, in the contemporary world, what I see the similarities in the jobs where the high posts are still filled in with the higher caste people. So that crust, the triangle, what we are talking is still maintained in the contemporary world with such thing. I'm talking about the service industry. This is one observation. So and it is not only in India but in the outside world also. The major posts, including VPs, then head of the departments, we see very few people there on the high post. So, and then it is propagated in the same way in the bottom layer or the working level. So this one analogy I see in the contemporary world.
Mangesh bhai, I just wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah.
What do you think would have caused the Mauryas to rise in the first place in the midst of such a toxic environment where it was impossible? Those very factors could be the templates for us this time.
Yes.
Also,
yes.
is
Very
there
important.
anything that you could throw some light on? What were the dynamics that caused it to rise and also fall?
Yes. See, the most important, it's just a reading from Babasaheb Ambedkar's literature is this first Chandragupta Maurya was kind of a rebel, and we know how he came to power, and people attributed success to Kautilya, but we know that that's a later interpolation into the history. But there was a period when Chandragupta rose to power, and then Bimbisar, who was a contemporary of the Buddha. And we know that, as Babasaheb Ambedkar has said in this book itself, that for the successful political revolution, the social and religious revolution is necessary. So that was a time when Buddha arose, and Buddha was such a first critic of Chaturvarna Dharma that that he completely leveled the society. If you look at the kind of a period that India saw that time, that his disciples went everywhere, crossed the mountains, rivers, they went everywhere with his teachings, the teachings of the Buddha, and they sort of leveled the society. And we see that when Ashoka rose to power, Ashoka was also Maurya. When Ashoka rose to the power, he was Charles Allen calls him the founder of India, the first founder of India, because that was a period when India was ruled like the great landmass from Afghanistan, Takshashila, Pakistan to Bangladesh, and all the way down to Karnataka and north, we know. And so he had this mighty empire, and we know that the polity of Ashoka was, Ashoka could do what he could do because the society, as it were, was ready to receive Ashoka, isn't it? So I think the template is, how we can bring this religious revolution even today, because we see now what happened on the 5th August in our country is such an anti-democratic sort of forces have really taken over. A prime minister sitting with some private organization inaugurating some temple is something, it shows that the cultural revolution that is, the counter revolution, because Buddha launched the revolution, and then that revolution was so strong that somewhere Babasaheb Ambedkar says that it was stronger in its impact than the French Revolution. Now we know the impact of the French Revolution on all different revolutions that have subsequently taken place. So this revolution, in terms of the changes in the attitude, the changes in thinking, because that was a time when it said that if you look at the Ashokan scriptures, the way he has these 12 pillars that he constructed. So some scholars were saying that because people could read and write, that's why he could erect those pillars. So the problem is the attitude of questioning that the Buddha promoted, because Buddha never said that believe in my words or believe in something which is coming from tradition. So it was in terms of its thinking, in terms of its development, in terms of not accepting the tradition. So what has happened during the before the Maurya period was, when the Maurya period was at the zenith of it, was a very very strong revolution, which was countered by the rise of the Brahminical forces, the rise of Manusmriti. Because at the time of the Buddha, the Purush Sutta existed, but the Manusmriti wasn't existing that time. So Brahmins were staying in some villages, but it was not that the Buddha was not coming from that background. He was a Khattiya, local man, Kshatriya. So I think we have to find a lot of roots into the sort of revolution that the Buddha launched, which culminated into a political ascent of the Mauryas. The Mauryas were rising before also the Buddha, and because the Shudra challenged the dominance of the Brahmins, because we know that Chandragupta Maurya was a Shudra. By all accounts, he was a Shudra, isn't it? And according to a lot of different documents, the Shudras in the ancient times, if you look at the modern history of India, who were the most enlightened rulers of our country? Shahu Maharaj, coming from the so-called Shudra background, he was a prince of this thing. Sayajirao Maharaj, he was coming from the Shudra background. He was ruling Baroda. So what I'm trying to get it as, you need that kind of the enlightened ruler. An enlightened ruler comes only when there is that kind of a society around, I think. I don't know the definite answer, but we can speculate, Rajkumar sir.
Yeah, one thing.
Can I just
Every political revolution is preceded by social and religious revolution.
Yeah.
So can I ask the next? Thanks for the explanation, but you made a very interesting statement on the parallel of Buddhism as a social change vehicle,
Yes.
and ascent of power for the Shudra.
Yeah.
Do you think it is could it be definitely not a coincidence that Manusmriti was written towards the latter part of the Maurya Empire?
Yeah.
Is it something like a Brahmanical tradition which tried to wipe out this concept and crystallize and sanctify the existing caste system? Is that the strategy?
Exactly, because what has happened, this when the Buddha came into being, he first of all he did two things. One thing, he freed the people. He said his religion was based on equality. He was the first person in the history of the world who claimed that all human beings are equal.
Right.
There is no difference between human beings, and he has said that there can be jatis among the animals, there can be jatis among the plant, there cannot be jatis among the human beings, and he goes into that. And his message of equality was so deep that there was actually, I said that time the society was a bit leveled. Okay. So for example, he was the first critic of Brahmanism, including he called Brahmins Kutta Danta. Now Kutta Danta means sharp tooth. Danta is a teeth, and Kutta means sharp, like a vampire who sucks the blood of the people. So there is a sutta called Kutta Danta Sutta. Okay, his critique of Brahmanism was so deep, so incisive, that he has done it, and his followers have done it. And what happened, these Brahmins lost their privileges. There were no yagya agas after the Buddha. So whatever dakshina the Brahmins used to get, it was stopped. Number one. And second thing that the Buddha stopped was the worship of the Kul Devat.
Okay.
You see, all these gods which were worshipped before the Buddha, like Indra, Varun, do you find any of their temples in India? Indra's temple or Varun's temple or Agni's temple? No.
Yeah.
Isn't it? So he did it. He did it, and then Ashoka took the message on the political level. But then there was a political revolution against Ashokan Empire, and Ashoka's grandson was assassinated publicly by Pushyamitra Shunga. And when the Shung dynasty came to power, they declared Brahmanism as a state religion. Okay, so when you declare Brahmanism as a state religion, then you enact your constitution in terms of Manusmriti. According to Baba Sahib, the name of the man who wrote Manusmriti was Sumati Bhargava. Okay, and he was the courtier of Pushyamitra Shunga.
So if we have to draw a parallel from what happened as a rise and fall, the amazing discovery and revelation of the religion, if you could call it religion, a movement of Buddha, and the fact that the descent of Mauryan Empire and also consolidation of of Brahmanism is by the disappearance of Buddhism to a large extent, or at least suppression of it, and a lot of persecution we hear about. Is it, again, when you said about the August 5th episode, there was a fantastic video made by one of the guys who said all those who were there at the forefront of many of the temple fights, like in the Babri Masjid or in any other place, would be our people, would be the Dalits, who would be told that this is your world and you have to serve. And at the end of the day, the others go away with the political mileage, but the ones who suffer with their families are those who perpetrated these so-called crimes, and they are looked at as criminals. So, you think that the attempt of Baba Sahib was very momentous in a way, that movement to Buddhism, had it been something that people would have taken on in a bigger way, even in the days to come, even after him, And even today, it's very relevant that why is it that Buddhism is not taken on much more by Dalits, which is so logical, historical, in every way redeeming as compared to Hinduism. Can you please tell that? Because it's really surprising that you stick on to a system which is oppressive when you have a redeeming philosophy available right at your doorstep.
Brother, these paragraphs has one word. Actually, there are many beautiful words. I think we should compile a dictionary of this book, because beautiful words are there. But there is one word called eternal servitude.
Correct.
Eternal servitude, and even today, the majority of our Indians are in the eternal servitude. Okay. Now, what has happened in the Indian history? There were caste movements, lower caste movement, but they always tried to imitate. They always tried to claim Kshatriya status. Everywhere it was happening, Kshatriya status, Kshatriya status. Okay. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear very clearly.
So there was a movement among the lower caste to claim that they are Kshatriyas everywhere. Okay, so this is called a Sanskritization. So long as we try to change positions in these caste structures, there is no revolution. So we do not have to aspire for the positional change, but for the structural change. So for the structural change, it's very important to come out of that container of Hinduism.
Absolutely, yes.
We cannot fight it within the system. We have to come out of the system, and the best way to come out is to become a Buddhist, and then develop your cultural identity different than the so-called Hindus.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So our festivals are different. Our thinking patterns are different. We think freely. We do not believe in the tradition just that because it's coming from the tradition. So we create what Ashoka did, a kind of a free thinkers. And there was a beautiful word at the time of the Ashoka called Anvikshi. Okay. So now Baba Saheb Ambedkar has planned like that. He wanted to have conversion movement at Agra, Madras, Mumbai, and many places. But because of his untimely death, and there was a lot of political things which were going on, 56, 55 elections and whatnot. 56, there was an election in 56. So I think, this is very important for all of us to really, help people out to think about the mass movements, mass conversion movement. It's very important. I think it is very political than people think it's religious. I will give you an example. At the time of the height of BSP, Kanshiram Sahab has created a lot of these community role models, and he showed that they were anti-Brahmins. So you have these community role models, and then you create a kind of a social pyramid which is completely anti-Brahminical. At the top is the Buddha, and then we have Phule, Shah, Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and then host of other people. Now what has happened in the last few elections, the BJP has exactly reversed it. They tried to Hinduize the symbols of every caste.
That's it.
Isn't it? So if you have if you convert to Buddhism, nobody can allure you with the thought of Hindutva.
Right.
Isn't it? So it's very political than political. It's religious, very deeply religious, but it's more political game.
Yes. Great.
Yeah,
I think
Mangesh, can I join in?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so it's so difficult to convince our people who are already imbibed in this Hinduism. Yesterday I was trying with my sister. She's a gynecologist. I told her, see, we should come out of. She says, whatever happens, I strongly believe in this, God and these things. And another colleague said, do you believe that? They say it is that like the Chaturvarna say that we don't belong to that body itself, that body of head and chest. And how is it possible? She retorted. I said, that's what we are asking. But she was strong that she will not come out of that thing. Then I told you, come out of the Hinduism. Then only you can see things. It's very difficult, but slowly I think we'll get there.
People are not forgetting Hindu sanskar yet. That will take time. That is called notional change. It takes time.
Okay. Thank you, madam. That's true, madam.
I will just
Even I-
give you one example.
Naval sir has raised hand. Naval sir, you want to say something? Yeah.
Venki,
I'm just waiting for the chance. Like let people say.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks.
I think just couple of things actually. First, what Mangesh has told about Chandragupta. Normally होता है कि जो राजा चलाता है वही धर्म चलता है. So whatever Raja believes in a religion, so everybody follows that. And why Chandragupta Maurya was able to like push Buddhism, because he came from a I think he was a soldier before. Just because of Kautilya or Chanakya, what you say, he became a king. And if you say that analogy now, like if you see the Congress era and compare that with BJP, you will see the Bhagavad was very less during the Congress era, but it propagated in like multiple times during BJP. Can you guys hear me? मेरा आवाज आ रहा है क्या?
Yes, sir.
Because I can hear some background noise actually.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I'll just mute. Yeah, continue, sir.
Okay, fine. The second thing, like what Pankaj has told about, yes, there are people who are sitting at the position of say VP, CEOs, CFOs. Yes, today we are not in that position. But if you see the background, why it is, and before that position, you see that these people are coming from private institutes mostly. Okay, where we are even till today, our majority of suppressed caste is not able to get into those institutions. Okay, probably being a doctor, you know that now it is an impossible dream for a suppressed caste guy or like a student to afford a medical fees which goes into crores and crores now. So they are creating such an education system now itself that we won't be able to get into those positions probably in another 5 or 10 years itself. Lastly, if you notice one thing now, they have done it with the Ram temple now. Okay, but if you see that they have forget the creator itself, I'm not sure whether they will have any single place for Valmiki in that Ram temple, who was the creator of Rama. Actually, we all know that it's all a written scripture. Actually, it never happened like that. At least I have that strong belief that the Ram was never there. It was only created by somebody. And yes, the last thing I would like to say that in jobs, what you see, probably most of the people who understand, like there is a say in Marathi, like dhaga dhagala chodto, or if I translate into English, a thread will always pull a thread. I hope the message is clear to all people here, who will pull and at what time. So fine, that was my opinion about it. Thank you.
Sonika,
Yes, sir.
can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Please.
There was some discussion about the first is I will answer the Naval's question.
Yes.
He was saying that there might not be any place for the Valmiki in that temple. Naval, let me tell you one thing. These people are very, very shrewd. You know, in 1989, when the first Bhumi Pujan and Shilanyas was done of the same temple, the first brick was laid by the Dalit candidate by the name of Chopal.
Okay.
He put the first brick. And when I go to different places, I usually don't go to the temples, but if I hear about them, not for the Astha, but for the structure, for the sculpture, I do visit them and to study their strategy as well. In many temples, you will see the this statue of Valmiki in their temples. Second thing, which Venki was telling, which is in chronology what I said, that it is very difficult to understand, to make understand our people to come out of this fold. As the enlightened people of this society are working to take them away from that fold, that society in the form of RSS is working very hard to bring our people in their fold. They are telling them, if you see the RSS, they are making them understand that there is an equality in Hindu Dharma and you are equally acceptable to us. And in that, what they are doing is that they are making pracharak of our people. They are offering post in the RSS to our people. The only thing is, which is not, we are not able to understand is that when we ascend the ladder of the RSS, which is the, and people reach at the think tank level, at the headquarter, there our ascent is slowly denied.
True.
In a very sweet manner. They don't offend you. They don't offend you to the extent that after reaching that stage, you leave them. They will not allow you. They will persuade you. They will do this. They will do that. But they will avoid not to take you in think tank. You can go to their think tank. By the time you are reformed to the extent that you start thinking like them. So that is one of the reasons that the Sanskritization of Dalits and Adivasis is happening at this stage, at this level.
Okay.
And I'm sure they are very shrewd. There will be a statue of Valmiki in that temple. I'm telling you.
So this is the time we must teach Buddhism to our people, Adivasi, OBCs and STs.
I didn't get you.
This is the time we must teach Buddhism to people, OBC, Adivasi, ST, and we are not taking that task.
This is like this.
There
are different groups. There are groups, I stay in North India and I am in the social and political thinking of North India. There are different groups. Like, this is a very vast country. Every group have a very large number. In North India, when we celebrate Buddha Jayanti and Dr. Ambedkar's birthday on 14th of July, have you, anyone of you have visited Parliament Street on 14th of April?
Yes.
Parliament Street on 14th of April. When we go to Parliament, pay our homage to Baba Sahab. If you will go there, I assure you, there is a queue for 2 to 3 hours, 4 hours to reach that place where the Baba Sahab statue is there. Lakhs and lakhs of people are there on the 14th of April on the Parliament Street. It starts early morning at 5 o'clock and goes on till 3 p.m. And all associations, there's so many shamiyanas there. So that group is working for our people to make them understand, to make them aware that come out of this fold. Then there's another group like RSS. They are also working hard not to allow you to go out of them and giving you all kind of promises and sweet dreams. Then there are neutral kind of people in our society. Neither they do harm to us, neither they want to come out of the fold of the Hinduism. They follow those rituals. But that when it comes to the political thoughts, when it comes to the voting, they vote for BSP. They are Hindus, they are Dalits. Religiously, they are Dalit, Hindu, but when it comes to the voting, they vote for BSP. And that is the reason BSP got to the power for so many times. So all groups are working their best. The only thing is how to make ourselves so dominant that the rest of the groups are become redundant for us. That is our fight.
Good.
And we are working in that direction. That's why we are all having these seminars. We are interacting on Zoom. We are trying to make it an all India group. We are trying to make it an international group so that those who really know the reality, those who understand their strategy of keeping us exploited forever, we should prevail upon other groups and take them out with us. That is our aim and goal is. I think so.
Yeah, yeah. Unity of all groups is needed, it seems.
So,
I would like to make one point, sir.
Please.
In nutshell, if I can summarize all these things, they are exploiting the identity crisis of our people. We all are in search of identity, and this crisis is so deep that everybody wants to come out of this, and we don't know how to come out of this. And they are exploiting this situation of ours and using our people. They are just like you said that the RSS is actively involved in doing this. They are giving some representation to these slaves of theirs, and they are making another group of slaves. So this is, I think, it's a strategy. It's a part of strategy. So yes, beautifully said that we have to think about this, how to come out, how to make our people think that they have their own identity and they should be proud of it. I think you can go ahead now.
Right, sir.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. There is an identity crisis and there is a desire, particularly among the educated people, to get accepted among the general people by the general people, and they are doing it beautifully.
So they are asking them to come to their land and do the work from them, because we are the people, those who are making governments. And we have seen so many friends of ours, those who are belonging to our community, they are hardcore supporter of Hindutva.
Rajesh, I will give you one example, very small example.
Yeah.
I stay at the Delhi-Ghaziabad border in Ghaziabad. Here we have a branch of Indian Medical Association by the name of West Ghaziabad. In Ghaziabad district, we have two branches. One is IMA West Ghaziabad, one is IMA Ghaziabad. In IMA West Ghaziabad, there is 3 families, and we have a membership around 450.
Okay.
450 people. Doctors. And all the doctors in IMA West Ghaziabad knows that myself and my wife, we are Dalits. You know, they have made me president for 1 year tenure, and they have made Dr. Seema president for 1 year tenure. Just to show that they have accepted us. Because we are very vocal on all WhatsApp platforms and everywhere. So what they are trying to make us understand, they know that these sort of revolutionary people are very, very dangerous for these people. They know very well that if we start doing the leadership and will spread our revolutionary statements or the thinking to the masses, it can go against them. So they try their all best to make myself and my wife and my family comfortable with them, that yes, you are acceptable in the Hindu fold, and you come to the Hindu Sabha, and you come to the Ramlila, and you come to the this and that.
We start feeling proud of that. Huh?
For the inauguration of the Ramlila of this area, and I am not going. These people are very. You cannot match their shoot.
They are working in a cohesive manner.
I think we can go on.
We can go ahead with all these things. We can discuss it later on.
I just want to share one thing here, and we will go on. Is, see, they have to do 100 things to keep their power, because it's based on lies and exploitation. If we do one single thing right or a few single thing right, we can really burst their bubble. That has happened in the history. That has done by Baba Saheb Ambedkar to the extent Manyavarji, and now it's in our hands. I think we can think about them. We can analyze their strategies, but it's very important to have conviction in ourselves. And I think it's very much possible that we can break their hegemony, because whatever lies they are spreading in the community, ultimately the people are suffering. And when the people suffer, And if there is a strong committed group of people who are committed to a certain emancipatory ideology, I think it's very much possible. So the point is, even if there are a few people committed to one particular goal, I think we can achieve it. So, these things happen, the crisis comes and goes. I think we have to strive hard together, and I think we will reach our target. And, I think the atmosphere is depressing. We feel that there is a crisis, but these are the opportunities that I think we have to pick up on.
We have to pick up, but we have to pick up it fast. We keep on planning, we are planning for so many years. The thing is, we are not able to reach to our target. We keep on talking of this thing. Every time we talk in any forum, we keep on talking, we'll do it. But it is not target-oriented approach. It is a plan. So that's why, I think we can go ahead and with that, if we want to complete it.
We don't reach to the people. We just talk.
Keep on talking. So no, the things are happening in the right direction. People are gathering now. But yes, by the time we are all together, there are forces that try to disintegrate us. But there are so many forces around us which make us realize that you as a group cannot succeed without us.
No, that's not true. That's not true. It has seen so many revolutions.
So I have seen so many groups emerging and disintegrating. So hopefully the things goes in right direction, and we work in a cohesive manner. Make people understand urgency is there. It's an urgent situation. Otherwise, the things will slip. How many people, the things are, these monumental things which are appearing, they are not good for our society. You must realize this. These things will change the mindset of the younger generations, which is happening, and we will be late if we don't awaken now. Okay. I think this is what I want to do.
Good evening, everybody. Hello.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah, I am Dr. Seema, Dr. Sudesh's wife, and
welcome,
ma'am. Obstetrics and gynecologist at UCMS and GTB Hospital, Delhi. One thing I wanted to just convey, because I was just hearing all the conversation going on. We should first strategize our what do we plan in future. We just cannot keep on talking about that this is happening and this is going wrong and we have to do something. What is that something we need to do? Okay, first thing is we have to identify what are our motives, socially, economically, politically, all those things we have to think, and we have to make a roadmap to reach those motives. So those things are important. Like, I will just give you an example. I have been involved in so many groups, we are quite active in Delhi. So being in a teaching hospital, I have many groups. And I have seen most of our doctors, recently you must have heard that the Director General of Health Services is Dr. Sunil Kumar. He is from GTB Hospital and he is our man only. So at all India level also, I know most of the senior positions in medical profession are from our people. This side of country, like in northern India, I know that thing. Okay. But whenever I see those social groups, WhatsApp groups, these people, those so-called upper caste people, they are so dominant. Like, they will post everything of theirs, happy Ekadashi, happy Raksha Bandhan, happy this, happy that. But when I post a single day on the birthday of Baba Sahab, when I say happy
Jai Bhim,
Ambedkar Jayanti, nobody replies. I know there are more than 30% people belonging to our community, but nobody will post such kind of things. I'm not saying that you just show your rebellious attitude, but you can just show your faith that yes, you belong to this and you have a faith in these, like Happy Buddha Jayanti. so many people, they are afraid of even putting those even pictures on social group, and that is very important to show our strength on these groups. Only if we start showing our strength, they will understand that yes, we are so many, and if somebody speaks or if somebody tries to do something against our people, we will show the strength. But the problem is we have never shown our strength, and we are, I don't know why we people are so afraid.
So we people are not courageous people, basically.
Yes,
We
that is
don't
the
have that courage of showing ourselves that I belong, because we, from birth itself,
yes,
we have that inferiority complex with us.
that
So
should
this is
go.
this
I
that
know.
is there, and that is bound to be there, because we were told that you are a people, those who are the inferior class of the society.
No,
Okay.
now we are almost third generation.
So this is what is happening. This is what is happening. We have to fight it out, and fight it out in a plan, in a strategic manner, so that our generation, that the coming generation realizes that if we disclose that I belong to this community, I am proud member of this community. And that's the thing which we have to inculcate in our younger generation. I think that will be important thing.
Yeah, we should be proud that we are Buddhists, we are Ambedkarites.
You know, ma'am.
Oh, even if we are not Buddhist, we are Dalits, we are Bahujans, and I am proud of it that I am Bahujan.
Somebody
That is more important.
Somebody was saying there is urgency. Yes,
I think
there is urgency.
too much internal conversation. We can do it. In a one session we cannot sort it out. Let's go on.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt because we are going somewhere else. Run the session right now. Otherwise, it's a very good discussion going on. Yeah.
Sonika.
Yes, sir.
My last point is there is a urgency. There is an urgency of somehow sustaining our next generation. They are going off the hook. I'm telling you. They are assimilating in the world of luxury, and they are going off the hook. There is an urgency to keep them with us. It's very, very urgent. That's all.
Right, sir. We are also. Yes, Pankaj.
1 minute, sorry.
Yeah, sure. Okay, please.
Ma'am was just saying something about WhatsApp group where a lot of posts are posted. But this is very positive thing for us. You know, generally everyone has a college group and a school group minimum. You know, this is the best opportunity when once they put something there, you know, we have fair opportunity to tell the things in positively. They post again reservation, we post in favor of reservation. They post something about them, something against Baba Saheb Ambedkar, we post something about Brahminism in a fair manner. You know, you believe me, I adopted this strategy from last 2 years in my college group. I have not seen a single message against reservation. Same thing happened in my school group. So this is a big strategy. We should not go away from these people, but fight with them in a right manner. It will definitely come up. I'm telling the truth. From last 2 years, not a single message against reservation. Because once they give something, a message is ready from my side. What is the reservation? So, you know, because you take up that, and there was one question in chat group. That is why I'm putting this strategy is very important. We need such people who talk against it, actually, you know.
Yes, yes.
Mangesh, you know what they do? What they do when you post this kind of message in the WhatsApp group, what they do?
Sir, I think we can discuss it, because this is not the only discussion that we are going to have. We have
okay, fine.
Have long.
Make another group without you.
Yeah. No. What I'm saying is, we talk a lot, like but I think the most important message that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has given us, that this caste system is like a Himalayan mountain, and I'm banging my head on this Himalaya, seeing my efforts, people will join us. I think each of us has to have this attitude that we are struggling with the Himalaya, we are banging our head on it, seeing our efforts, people will join. So I think we don't have to dishearten Sudesh sir. There are people like you, there are people like Rajesh, there are so many committed people in the community. We keep on banging our head on this Himalayan caste system, seeing the efforts of people. I'm sure people will join in.
Correct.
Baba said, when the truth is with you, you don't have to fear.
Should we move on further?
Yeah, okay, then we'll move on. Yeah, Shashank sir, please continue.
Yes. Section 18. Chaturvarnya is not new. It is as old as the Vedas. That is one of the reasons why we are asked by the Arya Samajists to consider its claims. Judging from the past as a system of social organization, it has been tried and it has failed. How many times have the Brahmins annihilated the seed of the Kshatriyas? How many times have the Kshatriyas annihilated the Brahmins? The Mahabharata and the Puranas are full of incidents of the strife between the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas. They even quarreled over such petty question as to who should salute first, as to who should give way first, the Brahmins or the Kshatriyas. When the two met in the street, not only was the Brahmin an eyesore to the Kshatriya, and the Kshatriya an eyesore to the Brahmin, it seems that the Kshatriyas had become tyrannical and the masses, disarmed as they were under the system of Chaturvarnya, were praying Almighty God for relief from their tyranny. The Bhagavad tells us very definitely that Krishna had taken avatar for one sacred purpose, and that was to annihilate the Kshatriyas. With these instances of the rivalry and the enmity between the different varnas before us, I do not understand how anyone can hold out Chaturvarnya as an ideal to be aimed at or as a pattern on which the Hindu society should be remodeled. I have dealt with those who are without you and whose hostility to your ideal is quite open. There happen to be others who are neither without you nor with you. I was hesitating whether I should deal with their point of view. But on further consideration, I have come to the conclusion that I must, and that for two reasons. Firstly, their attitude to the problem of caste is not merely an attitude of neutrality, but is an attitude of armed neutrality. Secondly, they probably represent a considerable body of people. Of these, there is one set which finds nothing peculiar nor odious in the caste system of the Hindus. Such Hindus cite the case of Muslims, Sikhs, and Christians and find comfort in the fact that they too have caste among them. In considering this question, you must at the outset bear in mind that nowhere is human society one single whole. It is always plural. In the world of action, the individual is one limit and society the other. Between them lie all sorts of associative arrangements of lesser and larger scope, families, friendship, cooperative association, business combines, political parties, bands of thieves and robbers. These small groups are usually firmly welded together and are often as exclusive as caste. They have a narrow and intensive code, which is often antisocial. This is true of every society, in Europe as well as in Asia. The question to be asked in determining whether a given society is an ideal society is not whether there are groups in it, because groups exist in all societies. The question to be asked in determining what is an ideal society are, how numerous and varied are the interests which are consciously shared by the groups? How full and free is the interplay with the other forms of associations? Are the forces that separate groups and classes more numerous than the forces that unite? What social significance is attached to this group life? Is its exclusiveness a matter of custom and convenience, or is it a matter of religion? It is in the light of this question that one must decide whether caste among non-Hindus is the same as the caste among Hindus. If we apply this consideration to caste among Mohammedans, Sikhs, and Christians on the one hand, and to caste among Hindus on the other, you will find that caste among non-Hindus is fundamentally different from caste among Hindus. First, the ties which consciously make the Hindus hold together are non-existent, while among non-Hindus, there are many that hold them together. The strength of a society depends upon the presence of points of contact, possibilities of interaction between different groups which exist in it. These are what Carlyle called organic filaments. That is the elastic thread which helps to bring the disintegrating elements together and to reunite them. there is no integrating force among the Hindus to counteract the disintegration caused by caste. While among the non-Hindus, there are plenty of these organic filaments which bind them together. Again, it must be borne in mind that although there are caste among non-Hindus, as there are among Hindus, caste has not the same social significance for non-Hindus as it has for the Hindus. Ask Mohammedan or Sikh, who he is? He tells you that he is a Mohammedan or a Sikh, as the case may be. He does not tell you his caste, although he has one, and you are satisfied with his answer. When he tells you that he is a Muslim, you do not proceed to ask him whether he is a Shia or Sunni, Sheikh or Sayyid, Khatik or Pinjri. When he tells you he is a Sikh, you do not ask him whether he is a Jat or Roda, Mazbi or Ramdasi. But you're not satisfied if a person tells you that he is a Hindu. You feel bound to inquire into his caste. Why? Because so essential is a caste in the case of a Hindu that without knowing it, you do not feel sure what sort of a being he is. That caste has not the same social significance among non-Hindus as it has among Hindus is clear. If you take into consideration the consequences which follow the breach of caste, there may be caste among Sikhs and Mohammedans, but the Sikhs and the Mohammedans will not outcast a Sikh or Mohammedans if he broke his caste. Indeed, the very idea of excommunication is foreign to Sikhs and the Mohammedans. But with the Hindus, the case is entirely different. He is sure to be outcasted if he broke caste. This shows the difference in the social significance of caste to Hindus and the non-Hindus. This is the second point of difference. But there is also a third and a more important one. Caste among the non-Hindus has no religious consecration. But among the Hindus, most decidedly, it has. Among the non-Hindus, caste is only a practice, not a sacred institution. They did not originate in it. With them, it is only a survival. They do not regard caste as a religious dogma. Religion compels the Hindus to treat isolation and segregation of a caste as a virtue. Religion does not compel the non-Hindus to take the same attitude towards caste. If Hindus wish to break the caste, the religion will come in their way. But it will not be so in the case of non-Hindus. It is therefore a dangerous delusion to take comfort in a mere existence of caste among non-Hindus, without caring to know what place caste occupies in their life, whether there are other organic filaments which subordinate the feeling of caste to the feeling of community. The sooner the Hindus are cured of this delusion, the better. The other set denies that caste presents any problem at all for the Hindus to consider. Such Hindus seek comfort in their view that the Hindus have survived and take this as a proof of their fitness to survive. This point of view is well expressed by Professor S. Radhakrishnan in his Hindu view of life. Referring to Hinduism, he says, the civilization itself has not been a short-lived one. Its historic records date back for over 4,000 years. And even then, it had reached a stage of civilization, which has continued its unbroken, though at times slow and static, course until the present day. It has stood the stress and strain of more than 4 or 5 millenniums of spiritual thought and experience. The peoples of different races and cultures have been pouring into India from the dawn of history. Hinduism has been able to maintain its supremacy, and even the proselytizing the creeds backed by political power have not been able to cause the large majority of Hindus to their views. The Hindu culture possesses some vitality, which seems to be denied to some other more forceful currents. It is no more necessary to dissect Hinduism than to open a tree to see whether the sap still runs. The name of Professor Radhakrishnan is big enough to invest with the profundity whatever he says and impress the minds of his reader. But I must not hesitate to speak out my mind, for I fear that his statements may become the basis of vicious argument that the fact of survival is proof of fitness to survive. It seems to me that the question is not whether a community lives or dies. The question is on what plane does it live? There are different modes of survival, but all are not equally honorable. For an individual as well as for a society, there is a gulf between the merely living and living worthily. To fight in a battle and to live in a glory is one mode. To beat a retreat, to surrender and to live the life of captives is also a mode of survival. It is useless for a Hindu to take comfort in the fact that he and his people have survived. What he must consider is what is the quality of their survival. If he does that, I'm sure he will cease to take pride in the mere fact of survival. A Hindu's life has been a life of continuous defeat, and what appears to him to be life everlasting is not everlastingly, but is a reality of life which is perishing everlastingly. It is a mode of survival of which every right-minded Hindu who is not afraid to own up a truth will feel ashamed. Should I continue? Should I continue, sir?
Mangesh sir, I think we should discuss this. Anyone would like to focus on this section, please?
Can I make a comment? I was
Yes,
very amazed at the way he is demolishing people like Radhakrishnan. He says that somebody is proving so moronically that survival itself is enough to show that it is good enough, or it is supposed to be premium. I mean, it is such a simple, the way he decimated the arguments. Survival cannot be proof of fitness. It is, the plane of fitness is what he talks about. At such a low level, like when he says gulf between merely living and living worthily, he suddenly looks at the plane of living and saying, yes, surviving in a disgusting way versus surviving in a different plane of quality. I think I really don't know what Radhakrishnan would have done with that kind of statement on his face. I mean, just commenting.
Driven away. So caste is most important factor amongst the Hindu, and not that important in non-Hindus like Sikhs and Mohammedan.
Ma'am, can I make a comment on that? Technically, that sounds very correct, and there is no scriptural sanction, unlike for the Hindus, where destruction of a caste system is anti-religious. In Christianity, anti their religion. For example, it's not anti-Christian to break caste. Having said that, the reality of caste, like the stench that Indians have taken to America with the caste, the caste has percolated into the church very much. In Andhra, Telangana, which is very known for its caste divides, the church has near vertical divides on who's going to which church is which. And there are subcastes divisions. With devastating about caste is that it can be carried, audaciously into any other faith. Though I'm not disagreeing with Baba Sahib here to say that that it is it's a difference between caste system in the church versus somewhere else, but definitively it is not as powerful as what caste system is there in Hinduism. Nevertheless, it is a stench which has actually touched the lives of people within other religions in this country.
Okay.
Absolutely agree with that. This is, and I want to say that.
I think Sonika is not here, I think.
Can I make a comment?
Oh, sure. Please go ahead.
Shall I speak?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. You see, caste system is ma'am, affected all the religions, even the monotheistic religions. Where I live, we have a church at the end of our lane. And this church has been built by our community people, Dalit Christians, because they are not allowed to visit the church, the religious place which the upper caste, these people, they don't allow them to enter there. And the same thing is in Sikhism. Our people, they have different gurdwaras. They cannot enter the gurdwaras of the high caste people or the feudal, these jats. Even the graveyards are different. We cannot burn our dead ones, in their graveyards. Our graveyards, our religious places, they're all different. So caste system, it has actually affected all the religions. It's not only in Hinduism. It may be more direct in Hinduism.
Just to defend Baba Sahib's explanation on that, I'm meaning that despite the appearance in the church, there is no religious sanction per se or a sanctity given to it that they can defend from scripture. They can do it as their own women fancy, but not from scripture. That is the fundamental differentiation, I think, which Baba Sahib is also saying, that it is still subservient to the faith, because if faith points out about caste, they have to shut their mouths. So I think that doesn't happen with Hinduism.
I think here we have to, this was a wonderful point. I think we have to take into consideration this discussion in the light of the groups, because there are a lot of technical things that we need to think about. One is the groups. What are the groups? And what is the difference between a group and a caste? And the way Baba Sahib Ambedkar has got into this, these groups are, if they are enclosed groups, by their enclosure itself, they become anti-social. And in any given society, we cannot avoid groups. There will be always groups. Okay. So, whether there are many points of contact between the groups is very important. So we have to really understand and grasp this, this beginning of this section in terms of how full and free is the interplay with other forms of association. Now, when we look at the caste vis-a-vis groups, we see that there is very limited interaction between the caste groups. Okay, so in order to have a society, no group can, if the group is very enclosed, and as we were discussing in the beginning, before the annihilation of caste, that the groups has to become very permeable. And I think that's very important point when we talk about the caste in terms of a group. We have to see that it's not enclosed group. Okay, I think we have to understand this very important concept that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has given in this particular section. Number one is group, and number two concept that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has given us in this paragraph, in this section, is the organic filament. And I think it's very important that there is always a tendency whether the group gets closed within or the group is expansive. So for example, if we look at the caste system and look at all various castes, they are all limiting groups. They are not expansive groups. So the question that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has raised vis-a-vis discussion in the discussion of the caste in other religion is, there is lot more in other religions to hold people in common, even when they are divided into groups of castes, even when they are divided into castes. For example, Christianity, Islam, they have other organic filaments which will hold them together. But among the Hindus, there is nothing like that which will hold them together. So they are always divisive. They cannot come together. They cannot forge a sense of a community because there is nothing that keeps them together. It keeps on dividing them further and further and further. And I think that's what we see in this mechanism and genesis of the caste. Even the new caste gets produced and reproduced, like the subcastes. We have Varna castes, isn't it? In every caste, see, organic filament is defined here as elastic thread which helps to bring the disintegrating elements together and to reunite them. There is a definition of organic filament that Baba Ambedkar has given here, and I think this is a very important point because there will be always group. Even when we have a social movement, there will be groups. But can there be an organic filament which will stop them from disintegrating further and keep them uniting? You see what I'm trying to get it at in terms of Carlyle's organic filament. I think this concept is so important for us to understand when we compare the caste in Hinduism and caste in other religion. Isn't it? So
absolutely, Mangesh bhai. Yeah.
Yes. I think you know what? Yeah. Rajkumar bhai?
I think the one of the organic filament is the fear of minorities. Rather than the positive, I personally feel there is not much of a difference as far as the caste system is considered in our religion, so-called Hindu religion and modern Sikh religions. It's not very much difference. Probably it might be at that time when Baba Sahib wrote it, but when we see practically now, probably the factor of fear is more prominent rather than the positive organic filaments.
But if I can support Mangesh Bhai's statement on organic filament, from a Christian perspective, the Christian perspective starts with the aspect of being made from dust, and then the breath of God gives life. So it's as if everybody is a commonality of dust and a commonality of the breath of God, and then it concludes by saying you're made in the image of God. Everybody has a divine image in oneself. So even if there's a local caste difference in India, though I myself pointed it out, it is definitely subservient to this organic filament. This organic filament binds people to say and reminds them constantly that, hey, you are one and the same, you have no hierarchy, you are at the same level, you are born of the same spirit. This is a strong organic filament I think I can allude to from the Christian faith, if I may.
Yes, what is true is that it does not have the caste system in those religions does not have the backing of the religious literature. That is a very good point. Our religious literature starts with the caste system.
Yes. So I think what is a takeaway for all of us when we think about the social movement, we have to think about in terms of what are the factors that can keep us united. Now I am speaking on an entirely different plane, as a strategy for a community to be united. Now, one of the things that has been happening for last 40, 50 years is, this emergence of pan-Ambedkarite phenomena. If you look back in terms of the awareness about the 14th April, as Sudesh brother was pointing out, now there is no village in our country which will not have a statue of Baba Sahib Ambedkar everywhere. So what has happened is, around this personality, a kind of an emergence of organic filament is emerging, isn't it? And we have to push it further with the study, with the practice, with understanding Baba Sahib Ambedkar, so that we create that kind of an organic filament. Even if we try to disintegrate, it will keep us integrated. I think every group has a tendency to disintegrate, and the caste, by the virtue of its nature, has a fissiparous tendency. It is never going to unite the communities. Where there is a caste psychology in any form, it's never going to unite the communities. So what we need is, we need to create these organic filaments, that elasticity, which will keep the groups together, the caste together, but at the same time, it will not let them divide further. And I think that is one of the greatest, insight we can draw from this section is how we create within our social movement those kind of organic filaments, that elasticity. I think the term is very important. When we look at the definition of it, the elastic thread. Sometimes we become so rigid that each one of us start thinking that we are the only people who are having the true understanding of Baba Saheb Ambedkar.
But Magesh,
it happens in the community. Everybody thinks that they are. Yeah, Rajkumar bhai.
Magesh bhai, I think somebody's dog is shouting. I wonder whose dog that is barking. What I was Magesh bhai, the thing here is that organic filament for the Dalits, as you said, if you build upon our commonalities, my question would be, would it be possible while building that organic filament to do so without rejecting Hinduism? Is it possible? Here is Baba Saheb saying, here is Baba Saheb saying that there is this organic filament, but the point, the commonality is that organic filament is caste system will be subservient to organic filament. Here, if we bring in Hinduism as a commonality for people, will it be possible to make it without rejecting Hindu faith? I wonder if it's really possible.
Brother, I think the most important question is whether Hinduism is there. It has been created artificially by the Neo-Brahmins, starting from Raja Ram Mohan Rai. That has been a part of their project to create Hinduism. As we know that this word Hindu didn't exist in any of the Hindu scriptures. You pick up any Hindu scripture, Ramayana, Mahabharata, whatever Sanskrit literature, there is no word called Hindu. Okay, so now what has happened is they have created this Hindu idea vis-a-vis the idea of other religions. Like it started with calling Hinduism a monotheistic religion. And the gift of monotheism by Raja Ram Mohan Rai. The point here is, our opponent, as some of our brothers and sisters were saying, they were very successful in creating this construct called Hinduism as a religious concept, and by which the large-scale Hinduization of the people have taken place. If you look at the history of the census, the Dalits didn't even agree that they were Hindus. They are always called Adi Hindus, Adi Dharmis, Adi Dravids, Adi Andhras, and so on and so forth. Isn't it? So this battle can only be won if we start deconstructing this very idea of Hinduism. And that's why one of the important books that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has written is The Riddles in Hinduism. To deconstruct that there is nothing like Hindu religion. There is no Hinduism. And one place, I don't know whether in Annihilation of Baba Saheb Ambedkar says that the caste is the breath of Hinduism. If you destroy caste system, the Hinduism dies its natural death.
Well, thank you.
Mangesh?
Yes, brother.
Out of this whole discussion, the one very beautiful thing has come out is that the organic filaments for the integration of the Dalits pan-India, and one organic filament is Ambedkar.
Yeah.
If we plan our strategy to make people to be with us, pan-India or pan-globe, that one filament we have discovered today is Dr. Ambedkar pan-India. Now, in our strategy should be that we all should introspect and think about other organic filaments which can help us in our strategy. Second thing, can we go ahead for our emancipation with Hinduism or without Hinduism? Now, if we go historically, if we will go further in this book, Annihilation of Caste, according to Baba Saheb, our salvation will not take place with Hinduism. He absolutely rejects it. If we see practically today in the contemporary world, my personal opinion is that if we embrace Hinduism and try to get our salvation done, in the short term, probably it will prove more useful, more purposeful. But in the long term, it will harm our interest. That's
right.
Listen, this is my prediction. It's just my you cannot, only the future tells you whether your predictions were correct or incorrect. I may be wrong. It only when I will the history, then only it will be proved whether I am wrong or right. But my personal opinion is that yes, in the short term, we will have more success. But in the long term, probably our whole idea of coming out of the caste system will melt out.
Yes, brother, we are reading Annihilation of Caste. So, we right now, focusing on the strategies by which we can annihilate the castes. Okay, our strategies can be derived from it. For example, Baba Saheb Ambedkar says that whatever we do, we should always pay attention to the ground plan. And the ground plan is to destroy the caste system. So whether we do political movements, whether we do social movements, whether we do religious movement, we have to always look at the ground plan that is set up for us. That's how we destroy the castes. And I think one of the ways that by which that can be destroyed is having this kind of a continuous discussion, finding the strategies that you have just underlined. But if you ask me what has happened in UP recently in terms of the Hinduization, re-Hinduization of a lot of different castes, the BJP has gained a lot. But I think that's another discussion that we can have. But the third point that I would like to discuss here is the plane of existence, which is a very important term that has come up in this in this book about at what level you survive, whether the survival is important or at what level you survive. And I think that level of survival is very important because this Baba Saheb Ambedkar is arguing in Annihilation of Caste the different supporters of the caste system. So for example, Radhakrishnan says that it's good because it has survived for 4,000 years, isn't it? So Baba Saheb Ambedkar questions whether the survival is important or the quality of survival is important. And elsewhere he says that the religion, so-called civilization, that has produced so many millions of criminal tribes that you have to put them in the concentration camp. So how can we say that that civilization or that religion is beneficial to the humanity? So I think this is very important. What I'm trying to get it at is when we are reading Annihilation of Caste or any book that is written by Baba Saheb Ambedkar, we have to search for these very important words and unpack them, deconstruct them, so that now we can talk about mere survival of a community. But are we trying to seek mere survival of the community, or are we talking about? So that's why somebody says that courage. How does the courage comes? Courage comes because we want to grow further. We want to evolve. We want to really fully utilize our potentials. So the important thing for our community at this moment is we cannot just think about the mere survival. We have to talk about the quality of survival. We have to have that courage to go ahead. We cannot have that defeatist mentality, as Baba Saheb Ambedkar says, that we can accept the defeat, accept the lowly life, or we can fight back. I found this concept very important, that the quality of survival in this section very important for us.
But one thing I did not understand, he was saying that he wants to remain in the Hinduism and then he wants to reform it. So he has no objection of the caste system. That is what he was trying to say, something like that.
I think when we move further, Baba Saheb Ambedkar has suggested certain reforms in the Hinduism, and they were not acceptable. There was a great learned Sanskritist from the Chamar community. Baba Saheb Ambedkar said that if you make him the Shankaracharya of a mutt, and if all the Brahmins worship his feet, I will not leave Hinduism.
So this concept should be clear.
Anyway, should we go on further? Which one? I think Brother Sudesh has put forward this concept. So you can ask a question to Brother Sudesh.
He is preferring Hinduism and its caste system. So he has no objection of the caste system. So there is no question of annihilation of caste for him.
No, I think he was referring to annihilation of caste, but he wants to reinvent the wheel. Well, I think we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Baba Sahib has done it for us, and we just need to follow what Baba Sahib has said. Like
Dr. Amrita, probably
convert
there
as much
Amrita,
people
probably
into Buddhism as possible.
Dr. Amrita, probably there is some misunderstanding what I was trying to convey. Can you please ask me again?
No, you were saying no. Yeah,
Dr. Alka.
Dr. Alka.
Dr.
I think
Alka, sorry.
Yeah, you said that Hinduism, to follow Hinduism is not, there is no objection in it. You can remain in Hinduism, and then reformation can be done in it. So you have no objection in caste system of that religion and sanction of the religion for that.
Dr.
Sudesh, can I answer that?
Yeah, please.
Madam, Dr. Alka, actually Sudesh was putting 2 points. Like he says, if you stay in Hinduism, and it may be easier to try to explain to those people and try to correct the Hinduism, but that will be detrimental in the long run. In the long run, it will be detriment to our Dalits. That's what he was. That's what I got it like. So he says, I mean, it is a better option to come out and defeat the caste system. Is it right, Sudesh? I got it right.
Yeah, you got it right. That if we try to be in bring about the reforms by making a Hinduism religion at all are equal, that is our fight is. Our fight is that we all are equal in any religion.
Sir, that is not, in the previous section, Baba Ambedkar has made it clear that so long as this label exists, no Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, whatever, so long as these labels persist, it's not going to change. In the previous sections, it's very explained very beautifully by Baba Ambedkar that this labeling has given them such a power that to be called. Even there is a Brahmin who is uneducated, people call him Pandit, aao idhar baitho. But even if there is a scheduled caste doctor or scheduled caste engineer, or you look at what has happened in this Rama Janmabhoomi, COVID, the president of India was not there. When Baba Jagjanaram Ram went for one inauguration of one statue, after he left, he was one of the most powerful man of his times. The whole statue was abolished. They were washed with milk. So what I'm trying to get it as, is we can try. Some of you can definitely try to remain in those folds and try to change it from within. But I think it's very important that we come out of that container of caste, because so long as we live in the dirty water, we cannot think afresh. We cannot think of new ideas. So I think we do not look at Buddhism just like a religion. It's also a process. It's also a method to transform our minds, and that's why the Buddha and his Dhamma comes into picture as to how we can have this revolution where we transform ourselves and to transform the world. So this is a long discussion that we can have, and in the future we can discuss about it a lot. But I want to take a call now. We have about 15 minutes. Should we go on reading further or discuss, Sonika? What's your call out?
One more section if we can read.
Or should we?
Let's discuss.
Yeah, I think we give 5 minutes for reading and 10 minutes for further discussion.
That section is very important, Mangesh. For that, we are reading this book.
Okay, everybody
5
wants
minutes
to
to
discuss
read
it, so
and 10
let's.
minutes we will have for discussion.
Mangesh Bhai, can I say?
Yeah.
Mangesh Bhai, can I say something?
Yes, Rajkumar Bhai. Yes, Rajkumar Bhai.
Regarding the aspect of moving to another faith, I think what is more vital from Ambedkar Saab's statement is that moving away from Hinduism is the key. Second thing is the impossibility of working out the equality aspect from within the Hinduism is what is the whole book about. Saying that, I think is layering upon layer in every chapter. I was fascinated to see he's proving again and again the impossibility of working from within the structure.
Yeah,
I think we cannot ignore that aspect. he is doing multifaceted approach on saying it is impossible to be इस घर में तो नहीं रह सकते.
Totally,
ये घर से तो
I
बाहर
agree.
निकलना है.
Beautiful
जिस
explanation.
कौन सा घर में जा रहे हैं वो it's a different story. So I don't know what people choose, but definitely the key point here is rejection and moving away from the Hindu faith is what he's saying. Am I right in what I said?
I think something
Yeah,
a cup of tea,
totally.
no,
It's a
unless,
very
unless you empty the cup, you can't refill it again. I think you have to get it emptied from this bullshit of Hinduism. And then you can refill it fresh and nice, better, and all the ideal things.
Good picture.
You know what to, you know, to put a quip, you know, this thing, he says, building a castle on a cow dung.
Oh,
Okay.
Beautiful
Got it.
metaphor. You know, whatever you try to do within it.
Yeah, it's still, I mean, you got a cow dung. I mean, you had the Hindus also in that. Okay. That cow dung was good. Okay, let's go. Please tell more about it, Mangesh.
No,
Thinking about
this is what he says, that, you know, trying to do anything within is like building a castle on a cow dung.
Is it Ambedkar's statement?
Yeah,
Actually?
yeah. Very metaphorical statement.
Songa, one more thing you got about him with the cryptic messages.
Yeah.
Another dictionary should be there, I think. Next.
See what, you know, some of us, you know, those who are, you know, into English or like that, they should really dig into the metaphors and these proverbs which are there in the in the writing and speeches. Because as Brother Rajkumar was saying, every time you read Annihilation of Caste, you come up with it's like multi-variable meanings. Every time you read differently, then again you come back. So it's like rereading. And, you know, strangely, you know, to tell you, we have been reading Babasaheb Ambedkar's other writings, very, very interesting. But this Annihilation of Caste has been taking such a long time. We are finishing only 2-3 sections because, you know, this book is so deep, it's so meticulously written that, you know, we can find lots and lots of meanings, lots and lots of strategies, lots and lots of things we can do.
So Pandit Mangesh Bhai, can I say
it looks
Pandit,
small, but it's like an atom bomb.
Right. Can I say Pandit Mangesh
No.
Bhai? This is easily
never.
This is easily the scripture of Ambedkarism. I would say this will be one of the fundamental scriptures of Ambedkarism. Am I right in that?
yes.
I didn't hear. Can you repeat it once again?
I was saying that easily, for such a well-written text, this could easily be the Ambedkarite scripture in hand.
Yes.
Hello? Was it audible?
Yeah.
Very audible, Songa. Yes.
I was trying to say that this is almost like a scripture for an Ambedkarite.
True. I would
Yes.
agree to that, Songa.
So,
Yes.
considering the Hinduism, again, Manusmriti, through Manusmriti, we have to go. What is told in Manusmriti? It is like going backward. Thinking in Hinduism is going backward, and there is no question of moving forward then.
About the scriptural aspect that Rajkumar Bhai has said, that, you know, this book was written in 1936 and so many things have moved on further. So this is like, you know, a very dynamite book, as we know. But also, you know, Rajkumar Bhai. But also, you know, we have to look into other writing and speeches which are very important for all of us to read one day. So one of the idea was to really appreciate, cultivate that kind of an attitude, to go back to our libraries and start reading Babasaheb Ambedkar. Because I feel that it's a key for our liberation. That this man has struggled, you know, the Columbia University, doctorate, London School of Economics, you know, reading all these widely read things. I think we have got the ready-made matrix by which we can produce revolutions after revolutions if we can start grappling the ideas, the concepts that Babasaheb Ambedkar has given us. So I think if we can begin as a community to deeply read into the writing and speeches of Babasaheb Ambedkar, I think we can we can become very fearless, number one. Number two is we can find the tools for our emancipation. Our community is not only our community, but I think, he has given us the tools to emancipate the whole of India and the whole oppressed communities of the world. So I think, as you said, Rajkumar Bhai, they definitely has the status of a scriptures, but I think, there are so many things we need to read.
Very true, sir. In fact, what shocks me is a tragedy I was reading yesterday, if I may share, about the writings and speeches of Baba Saheb, that apparently when he passed away, there were so many unpublished ones because he did not have money. And the publication of Buddha and his Dhamma is something that he struggled with, asking Nehru for 20,000 rupees.
Yeah.
And how he really struggled to raise some kind of funds, went to the Tatas and others, and eventually it was published posthumously after his death. And the plethora of his writings, the voluminous writings of his, sadly, when Savitaji left the home because of some reason, apparently they were thrown away in front of the house, and it rained that day, and many documents were destroyed forever. And when this whole thing was taken and kept in the Delhi archives, for some reason that the government owned them up because Baba Saheb died intestate, that this whole inheritance of things were kept quietly for 3 decades till they were published in a big way. And what really sent a chill down my spine is we could have just lost everything. And we could have just lost Riddles in Hinduism, one of his amazing things that I have read. And thinking that till today people say that it is still not the original document, which is completely written by Baba Saheb. There must have been some portions that have been destroyed or left out. So in a way, I think it is whatever you call it, as a higher power or whoever has kept this alive for us. We would have lived without knowing Ambedkar as an amazing scholar had it not been for the preservation of these documents and being printed. I don't know why for 30 years there was silence. Imagine the speeches and writings being printed in the 40s. What could have happened in the next 3 decades is only left for conjecture.
That's very true. This explosion in the Ambedkarite movement in the year 1991, birth centenary of Baba Saheb Ambedkar, coincided with this explosion of the material available. And that has really changed a lot of dynamics in this country. People started reading it, appreciating it, understanding it. That has really, changed the dynamics of the social movement in our country. We can say that, Rajkumar Bhai. And, one of the pioneers of bringing this writing and speeches was Vasant Moon. It was very close to me, when I was living in Bombay, I used to go, he was very good friend to my brother. So, this gentleman, Vasant Moon, has done so much of efforts. As you said, these books were lying in the boxes. And when he opened it after 20-30 years, you won't believe that, his skin was damaged. He has this skin disease.
Okay.
So, it was such a loss, but I think we have to regain it. We have to regain our capital.
In that same comment, Mangesh Bhai, the fact that the world has not been exposed to his writings in a big way, because it's been about, if you say 89 and 91, and 89 is when the Maharashtra government, I think, came up with it, 88. I think exposure of his writings in a big way to the Western world will also make a lot of difference. There seems to be a lot of scholars who have done some work, but they are not widely read books of, they are not widely read by the West. I wonder if there is a strategy that we can develop from India to make this explosion possible of the best of his excerpts or his writings to be made available to the West in a big way. Now the limitation is Maharashtra government owns it, sits on those multiple volumes as the publisher. Is it true that it's out of copyright that we can print on our own?
We can print off our own. One of the projects that virtual reading group needs to take up, and that's what we have been thinking, is to produce the keywords of Baba Saheb Ambedkar. It's like a dictionary of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, where, you know, for example, if he has used the word democracy, how many times he used, how many definitions he has given, in what different ways, because I can see that there are at least 20-30 definitions of democracy in the writing and speeches which Baba Sahib Ambedkar has given. So for example, when he talks about the word liberty, what does he mean by liberty? How many places? So that we have this ready reckoner with us.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah.
Isn't it? So
like a word encyclopedia.
Yeah. So for example, caste. How many times Baba Sahib Ambedkar has defined caste? Because he has defined caste in many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, sometimes as an enclosed class, sometimes as a graded inequality. So, you know, if we can go get as a group, if we can go. It's very easy to do. We take a keyword, go through the PDF file, bring them, you know, together on one page. So what will happen? It will be like a ready reckoner for all of us.
Right. Absolutely.
Isn't it? So we select like keywords. Like here we have got organic filament. So citing Carlyle, what Baba Sahib Ambedkar said about organic filament. And like that, we can have kind of a 200-300 pages of a dictionary, which can be widely circulated among the scholars everywhere, which can be so useful to all of us, because we don't have to, you know, we did one very interesting project in VRG recently of quoting Baba Sahib Ambedkar's writing and speeches. That project. Hello?
Mangesh bhai, we lost you for a little while.
Yeah, I think
Hello?
Pune is having very bad.
There was this compilation of Manu's reference of Baba Sahib Ambedkar in the writing and speeches. Yes. Am I audible now?
Yes.
No, recently we did one project where Manu's quotes were, you know, taken of speeches of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, and, you know, it runs into 340 pages.
Yes, please continue, Mangesh.
Yeah. So I think we should take up this project, because we got beautiful minds here and a lot of dedicated people here. We should take up this project, compiling the keywords of Baba Sahib Ambedkar
and cross-referencing them as to wherever they have they've appeared. And the way. So each word will lead them to different books, so that they're encouraged to read about them, right?
Exactly. Amazing. We will give the page number. Exactly.
So kindly proceed and do it as soon as possible.
Yes. We all need to work on that project together.
Go ahead with it, conceptualize the idea, and distribute the work among the members.
Yes, sir. We will do it, sir.
Mangesh, one thing I wanted to add on is,
brother,
as far as the percolation of Baba Sahib thoughts in the general society is concerned, nowadays in northern India, I am reading a lot of newspapers, articles, editorial articles, national dailies.
Yes.
And there is one big change. Earlier, I used to see once in a while in some magazine or in some newspaper editorial article, mentioning the name of Baba Sahib. But what a great difference I am seeing is with the time is that now the editorial articles are mentioning him and quoting him much more frequently than they were quoting him earlier.
Very true.
It's because if there is any problem facing this country, you have to look at Baba Sahib Ambedkar. It's true, sir. It's true. Economic problem.
Not only the country, the world also.
Yes.
Like true. I mean, there's a threat to the